Hey folks, how you guys doing? I'm not in my shop this week. Myself and April Wilkerson are actually in Wisconsin at Nick Ferry's shop. He had to run and get some materials really quick, so while he's gone, we don't have much time, but we want to knock out a quick and easy outfeed / assembly table. Something that's quick and easy to make, and something that we can actually use to make some other projects while we're here. The design we came up with is pretty straightforward and nothing complicated at all. It's about 2 feet wide, 4 feet long, and the height is slightly less than the height of Nick's table saw. Now it's got a lower shelf and a slightly larger top working surface, and if you notice, the legs are rather wide, and that's on purpose. That's because we want to have a nice wide lap joint which will resist racking once it's finally assembled. And because there's really not much to this particular table, we can go ahead and follow the cut list all the way through and cut all of our parts before we do any assembly. The first step with any project using plywood for me is to break down the plywood into a much more manageable size for the table saw, and we're using a couple pieces of foam insulation to lay over the table saw and use it as a protective surface or a sacrificial surface to use a door board, as Nick calls it, or a track for your circular saw to make the first cut. It's interesting working with other people because you have different names for different items. I would call this a track saw or a track for a circular saw. Nick has always called it a door board, so it's a great learning experience working with other people. Making the first cut on a full sheet of plywood with a circular saw results in two much more manageable sized pieces that can be cut more accurately at the table saw. And anytime you're working on a project with somebody else in, say, a team environment, it's always best to be observant of the situation and know exactly what the other person may need next. The majority of the cuts were made using the table saw and the rip fence alone, but we did have to cross-cut a few pieces. And anytime you are cross-cutting on the table saw, if your pieces are significantly longer left to right than they are, say, front to back, then just the table saw fence alone might be a little too dangerous because you just don't have that much surface area referencing off of the fence, and it's a little bit easier for the piece to bind into the blade, which causes all kinds of problems. So for those cuts, we used Nick's table saw crosscut sled. And as a side note here, if you are looking to build a table saw sled, I definitely recommend you check out Nick's plan. While I was up there visiting, I used this sled a ton, and it was just an absolute treat to use. It's definitely a very versatile sled. For assembly, glue and brad nails are used in every joint on this table, and we started with the identical top and bottom frames. Now immediately after the frames were complete, we can go ahead and install the lower shelf because it is the exact size of one of the frames. And again, more glue and brad nails to attach it. Next up is the legs, and all you have to do is make sure that the best side is visible and assemble the 4 L shapes. It doesn't necessarily matter if you have 2 lefts or 2 rights because it can always be flipped upside down and a left becomes a right and vice versa. So once again, you just need to make sure that there's glue in the joint and use brad nails to secure them. With all of the frame and leg sub-assemblies complete, the final assembly can start. And as I said earlier, the real strength of this table comes from the wide lap joints. So you really want to make sure you maximize the glue surface area there. And we're building this table upside down, so the top of the legs can reference flush with the top of the frame. And once again, glue and brad nails to secure it. We slid the lower frame and shelf in from above, and it's worth noting that we used some scrap from the full sheet of plywood we started with to cut 4 spacer blocks to help us locate the exact position of the lower shelf, and that's completely dependent upon how high you want the shelf to be. So once it was in place, we again used more brad nails to secure it. Finally, the table can be flipped over onto the floor, and then the table top can be attached with, once again, and for the last time, glue and brad nails. So the main idea for this table was to have some type of working surface or working table to use for the rest of the collaboration, but it doesn't necessarily have to be used as an assembly or outfeed table like we're using it. You can make multiples of these and make them modular, use them for a drill press or pretty much anything else you want in the shop. The design is very universal friendly, I guess you could say. Now, speaking of collaboration, this table does reside in Nick's shop, and he has since made some changes to it, as well as a video covering those changes. A link to that video is in the description below. And also, April ended up making a folding outfeed table for her table saw, and if you want to see her design, there's a link to that video in the description as well. And if you aren't already familiar with April or Nick, be sure to subscribe to both of them, not only because they make some awesome videos, but because they have some videos coming out from the rest of this collaboration trip that you definitely don't want to miss. So if you're interested in a free cut list and a SketchUp file for this table, check out the build article for this video. Thanks for watching, and take care.